It was the year 1885 when John Richards, a hard-working rancher, found himself living in the harsh and unforgiving wilderness of Arizona. He had always been a man who loved the freedom of the open land. It was the kind of place where the mountains stood tall like silent guardians, and the wide desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Life here wasn't easy, but it was honest work. John spent most of his days tending to his cattle, mending fences, and working with the land to make sure his ranch was successful. John was known in the nearby town for being a man of few words. He didn't enjoy gossip or idle chatter. He'd rather get his hands dirty than waste time talking. But there was something about the wild, untamed lands of Arizona that always drew his curiosity. He'd heard a lot of stories over the years, tales about mysterious creatures, strange happenings, and hidden treasures in the land. But he never paid them much attention. To him, they were just local legends and nothing more. One afternoon, after finishing his work, John found himself sitting at the local saloon, sipping on some whiskey. The dusty room was filled with the usual crowd, men talking about the weather, cattle prices, and the latest gossip. But today a conversation caught John's attention. Two old men, sitting at a corner table, were talking in hushed tones. John overheard them mentioning a cabin that was up for sale. The men didn't speak too loudly, but it was clear from their tone that the cabin wasn't something people talked about openly. John leaned in, trying to catch more of the conversation. He knew the men, and they were seasoned ranchers who had lived in these parts for decades. If they were talking about something, it was usually worth listening to. One of the men, an old rancher named Gus, muttered, "I wouldn't go near that cabin, not if you paid me $100. "Why's that?" the other man, Steve, asked. Gus shook his head. "It's cursed, that's why. The place is haunted, they say. Folks who've been by it say there's something wrong with it. Bad things happen around there." John raised an eyebrow. He didn't believe in curses or ghosts, but the mention of a cabin for sale piqued his interest. The idea of adding more land to his ranch was tempting. With the growing demand for cattle, expanding his property could make a big difference in the long run. "You're saying the place is abandoned?" John finally spoke up, joining the conversation. Steve nodded. "That's right. It's been empty for years. A settler family used to live there, but they disappeared without a trace. Some say they were taken by the Apache. Others say they just ran off. But no one's gone near that cabin for years. Not even the lawmen. They say it's got bad luck." "Bad luck? It's a building, not a ghost," John replied, brushing off the old man's warnings. He didn't believe in such things. To him, the land was just land. There was nothing to fear if you knew how to work with it. Gus, however, wasn't convinced. "I'm just saying, be careful. If you're dead set on buying it, then that's your choice. But remember, sometimes land can come with a price. And this one, it's got more than just dirt under it." John chuckled, finishing his drink. "Well, I appreciate the warning, but I think I'll take my chances." "How much are they asking for it?" "Only 12 cents, Steve replied with a shrug as if it were nothing. John paused. 12 cents? That sounded like a steal. He had enough money to buy the place on a whim. For that price, he could take a risk. What did he have to lose? "Where can I find it?" John asked, a spark of curiosity lighting up in his eyes. If it was truly abandoned, it could be a good addition to his ranch. Maybe he could fix it up, make it livable, and have a place to stay when the weather got rough. Plus, he could use it for storage or as a shelter for his workers during the colder months. The two old men exchanged glances but didn't say much more. They knew John had made up his mind. There was no stopping a man once he had his mind set on something. Steve finally gave John the directions. "It's about 10 miles north of here on the edge of the desert. But I'm warning you again, it's not a place you want to spend too much time in." John just nodded. He wasn't afraid of a little challenge. He thanked the men, left the saloon, and mounted his horse. He was excited about the prospect of buying the cabin. It was cheap, and it might even become a useful addition to his ranch. The ride to the cabin took longer than John had expected. The sun was beginning to set as he crossed the dry, cracked earth of the desert. As the shadows stretched longer across the land, John couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. The wind howled through the empty spaces, and the distant mountains loomed like silent sentinels. When he finally reached the cabin, the sky had turned to a deep shade of purple, and the stars began to twinkle. The cabin was just as the men had described, old, weathered, and covered in layers of dust and dirt. It was a small one-story structure made of timber, with a sagging roof and broken windows. Despite the apparent decay, John could see potential in it. The land around it was vast, open, and could easily be turned into a pasture for his cattle. He dismounted and walked closer to the cabin, inspecting it from every angle. There were weeds growing around the foundation, and the wooden planks creaked under his boots. The air smelled musty, like something had been abandoned for a long time. John stepped inside. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dim, dusty room. It was eerily quiet. The floor was covered in dirt and debris, and the remnants of old furniture lay scattered around. A cold draft blew through the cracks in the walls, and John felt a chill despite the heat outside. He made his way through the cabin, inspecting each room. The back room was the most interesting. There was a large open space with a wooden beam running across the ceiling. The room was cluttered with old crates and broken furniture, but something about it made John feel uncomfortable. The air felt heavier here, as if something was watching him. John shook off the strange feeling and continued his inspection. He wasn't one to be scared easily. The cabin needed a lot of work, but it was exactly what he had hoped for. A perfect project. He could see himself fixing it up and turning it into something useful. But as John turned to leave the cabin, something caught his eye. An old wooden chest tucked away in the corner. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but it looked oddly out of place. It wasn't as old as the rest of the furniture, and it seemed to have been placed there recently. John approached the chest with caution. Something about it felt strange. He wasn't sure why, but he had the nagging feeling that there was more to this cabin than he had initially thought. As John stood in front of the old wooden chest, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had crept over him since he first set foot in the cabin. The place felt strange, like something was out of place, but he couldn't figure out what it was. The chest was small but sturdy, with intricate carvings along its edges that seemed out of place compared to the rest of the cabin's worn and dusty interior. John took a deep breath, trying to push aside his discomfort. He had come here with the intention of inspecting the cabin and possibly making a deal. So far, he'd found a lot of things that needed fixing, but nothing that made him second-guess his decision. After all, it was only 12 cents. What could go wrong? He crouched down and reached for the chest. The moment his fingers brushed against the wood, he felt a strange shiver run through him. The chest seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain. It was as though it were alive in some way, its presence overpowering everything else in the room. Despite the feeling in his gut urging him to leave it alone, John slowly lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was nothing but a thick layer of dust and some old, faded blankets. But something caught his eye at the very bottom, a small, weathered book. It was bound in what looked like animal hide, and it was covered in strange symbols that John didn't recognize. His curiosity grew stronger, and he carefully pulled the book out, wiping the dust off the cover. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. The handwriting inside was difficult to read, but John could make out a few words. Apache, curse, spirit, and revenge. The more he read, the more his heart began to race. It seemed as though the book contained the story of the cabin's original occupants, a settler family who had lived there many years ago. But as he read further, John's blood ran cold. The journal told of a tragic and disturbing event. The family who had lived in the cabin had been part of a group of settlers who had been ambushed by Apache warriors during a raid. The father of the family had been killed, and the mother and children had been taken captive. The Apache had a strong belief in spiritual forces, and it was said that they held a special reverence for the women of their tribe. One of the women they had captured was different, much larger than the others, with strange abilities that set her apart. John paused for a moment, trying to absorb the meaning behind the words he had just read. It seemed impossible, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The book mentioned a girl, a giant Apache girl, who had been imprisoned by the settlers in the very cabin John now stood in. She had been kept in a small, dark room, chained to the walls like an animal. The journal's pages were filled with angry, desperate words written by the woman who had lived in the cabin. She had been the wife of the settler who had captured the girl. The woman wrote about how the giant girl's presence seemed to have a strange power over the land, how she could feel her watching from the shadows, even when she wasn't physically there. There was a growing fear that the girl would bring harm to the family. The settlers were terrified, not only of the Apache warriors but of what the girl might be capable of. As John read on, the account grew darker. The journal explained that, in a fit of desperation and fear, the settlers had decided to execute the girl. They believed that by doing so they would break the curse that seemed to hang over them. The family took the girl to the very room where John had been standing just moments ago. They hanged her from the rafters, believing that killing her would rid the cabin and the land of the evil they thought she brought with her. John felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The words on the pages blurred as his hands began to tremble. He had to stop reading for a moment, but his curiosity kept him from closing the book. His instincts told him to walk away, to forget about it and leave the cabin behind. But there was something pulling him in, something he couldn't explain. The journal continued, describing the aftermath of the girl's death. It was clear that the settlers were never the same after they killed her. The wife wrote that the land seemed to grow colder, the crops withered, and the animals began to die. Every night the family would hear strange noises, whispers in the wind, footsteps in the dark, and the sound of chains rattling. They believed the girl's spirit had returned for revenge. The woman's writing grew more frantic as she begged for forgiveness, knowing that they had made a terrible mistake. As John turned the final pages, a chilling thought struck him. What if the girl's spirit still haunted this place? What if her curse was real? A loud creak of the cabin's door snapping shut behind him brought John back to reality. He jumped, heart pounding in his chest. For a moment he thought he saw a figure standing in the doorway. But when he looked again, there was nothing. He was alone. His mind raced. Had he heard something? Or was it his imagination playing tricks on him? He turned toward the chest and slammed the book shut, his breath coming in quick bursts. The eerie silence of the cabin was suffocating now, pressing in on him from every direction. Suddenly there was a noise from the back of the room, a scraping sound, followed by a low thud. John spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty, but the noise continued. It sounded like something dragging across the floor. His stomach churned as the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop, and he could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He hadn't imagined it. The wind outside had picked up, howling through the cracks in the cabin's walls, but the noise inside the room was different. It was deliberate, slow, and heavy. John swallowed hard. He knew there was no explanation for what he was hearing. His thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of everything. The journal had described a spirit that haunted the cabin. Could it be real? Was the Apache girl's ghost still trapped here, seeking revenge for her death? He took a hesitant step toward the back of the room. The sound was louder now, as if whatever was making it was right behind him. He didn't dare turn around. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but his feet felt frozen to the ground. He had to know what was happening. As he turned slowly, his eyes scanned the room. The shadows seemed to dance across the walls in the flickering light of his lantern. And then in the far corner of the room, John saw it. A faint outline, a figure that seemed to shift in the dim light. It was tall, impossibly tall, and the closer John got, the more he could make out the features. The figure was that of a girl. But not just any girl. A giant girl. Her features were distorted as though she were made of shadows and fog. But the outline was unmistakable. She was standing there watching him, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. John froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, but John could feel the weight of her gaze. The stories, the journal, and the chilling noises all suddenly made sense. The Apache girl's spirit had never left this cabin. It was waiting for someone like him to find her. As the figure took a step forward, John's heart pounded in his chest. The world around him seemed to shrink. He realized that the stories were true. The curse was real, and now it was too late to escape.